Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. If you're new to my channel, I have these live streams regularly with more in-depth talk and analysis. If you prefer shorter videos, I also have a video tab where I post updates regularly and videos on a regular basis. In this live stream, I want to talk to you about a few things. Firstly, the brawl that happened between Yaakov Galant and Benjamin Netanyahu. It was described in Israel as an unprecedented brawl. They have seen nothing like it before. And before I get into their brawl, their recent one, I'll give you a bit of a background as to what happened between these two previously and why are they still together if they are brawling. Then I want to talk to you about what's happening in the West Bank, because Israel is treating the West Bank as a different front now. They are having negotiations with the chief figures in the West Bank. For example, there was a negotiation going on between them and the head of the Jenin municipality regarding a ceasefire, because they are in multiple parts of the West Bank, and it doesn't look like they are going away from the West Bank. And we just had another act against Israelis in a settlement in the West Bank called Gush Atzion. And despite the fact that Israel is killing the heads of the resistance or the armed resistance in the West Bank, they cannot take them down. As a matter of fact, Israel has been doing that for years, for decades. They kill senior figures all the time in the West Bank. Why? Because they have less protection, firstly, these people. Secondly, they have a collaborating authority in terms of the West Bank Palestinian Authority collaborating with Israel. In many cases, they do these assassinations on their behalf or they support them. Of course, there are certain figures who are not totally in line with the official way that the Palestinian Authority is going. However, in general, that's how it works in the West Bank. But of course, they haven't reduced any of that, Israel, any of the armed resistance. As a matter of fact, they've escalated it. Why? Because they never address the core problems. They never address the problems of occupation. They never address the problems of injustice. They never address the problems of apartheid and killing against the Palestinian people and checkpoints, and the list goes on, and the daily suffering of the Palestinian people. With regards to Yaakov Galant and Benjamin Netanyahu, I'll read up a couple of things that came on Israeli mainstream media, but before that, I'll give you a little bit of a background. Firstly, Yaakov Galant is a member of the Likud party. The Likud party that is led by Benjamin Netanyahu. Some people tried to challenge Benjamin Netanyahu on the leadership of the Likud party in recent years, but they failed. They have failed. Yaakov Galant was sacked over a year ago by Benjamin Netanyahu after Yaakov Galant showed sympathy with the protesters who were protesting and taking the streets in Israel against the judicial reform. A reform that Netanyahu and his close allies intended to have in Israel so that they can take control over the judicial system. Many Israelis viewed that as a path to dictatorship. They refused the judicial reform, and they were protesting in the streets, of course. And the massive split in the Israeli society began really from that time, the big split in society. From that time, you had people starting to call for immigrating from Israel, leaving Israel. You've had people calling for refusing to serve in the army. You've had at one instance over 1,000 troops sending a letter to Netanyahu, including people in the Israeli Air Force who said that we will not be serving. Other people said we will not be serving under a dictatorship, as they called it. When Yaakov Galant showed sympathy with these people, Benjamin Netanyahu sacked him. However, he had to take him back because he faced a lot of repercussions. People showed support for him. And clearly, Yoav Gallant had the ability to take certain actions that Benjamin Netanyahu did not really like. So the relationship between Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu hasn't been great from before the 7th of October. Following the 7th of October, Benjamin Netanyahu had hoped that he would gather the Israelis around him, leading this war on their independence again, as they called it, or a war on their existence. And he succeeded in gathering a few people around him, like he had Benny Gantz again and Gadi Eisenkot in the war cabinet, who later on resigned. He had sympathy and people supporting him from across the board, including previous people who criticized him heavily and are now back again to criticize him. To be fair, some of them did say that we are going with Netanyahu now and supporting because we're in a state of war, some of them. Not that we are aligned politically with Netanyahu, and once the war ends, we are going to continue the battle for the judicial reform. However, Yoav Gallant remained there the whole time. Yoav Gallant was there. Why? Because he was in the government. He was still the defense minister. Benjamin Netanyahu tried to cause him a lot of problems by planting Bezalel Smotrich in his ministry, by giving him a title of a minister in the Ministry of Defense, something unprecedented in Israel, although he is the finance minister, Smotrich. But Netanyahu did that deliberately to cause Yoav Gallant problems in his own cabinet, in his own, ministry, because then he started to have feuds with Bezalel Smotrich, who controls what. You have no authority to say this. You have no control over the West Bank. I have control over them. Bezalel Smotrich started to try and legalize certain settlements or outposts by squatters in the West Bank. He faced objections from Yoav Gallant in many cases. We had Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and Benny Gantz at the time refusing to have a joint press conference following the 7th of October. That happened many times. They did not communicate for months in certain periods. They were visibly upset with each other when they did have press conferences, and they failed to have meetings previously several times. So sometimes the meetings would be cancelled. Sometimes Netanyahu would suspect who's going in and check them, including the previous IDF chief of staff, security checking him to make sure that he doesn't have any recording devices with him. And they had brawls. There were brawls between Yoav Gallant and other members of the war cabinet at the time and Benjamin Netanyahu. At the peak of these tensions, Yoav Gallant once stormed Benjamin Netanyahu's office with a threat. He stormed Benjamin Netanyahu's office with a threat saying that if you don't understand law and order, next time I'm going to bring a brigade from the IDF Golani to instill law and order, in a direct threat of almost a coup against Benjamin Netanyahu. So, of course, we had resignations, and we did not have Yoav Gallant resigning. They threatened each other. They did a lot of things. And now we're having these problems again. What are these problems on now? They are, and then I'll start reading parts of the article. I'm just giving you a brief detail before I go into the article itself that was posted on the Jerusalem Post. Hamas wants them to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor. Egypt wants them to withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor. So far, there is no solution, there is no hope for a ceasefire unless Israel agrees to withdraw from all parts of Gaza. Unless Israel agrees to withdraw from all parts of Gaza, including the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim line. Why are they such a big problem now? It's because of Hamas's alertness. That's primarily why. Because Israel was going to agree to a deal between them and Hamas and have everything signed until Hamas said, hold on a second, the previous draft that we had did not include the fact that you are now occupying the Philadelphia corridor and the West Bank. So the Palestinian side could have treated it as an Israeli agreement to withdraw from all parts of Gaza that it had occupied and did not include the Philadelphia corridor, for example, and Netzarim. Hamas told them this has been something that's added now to the political scene or the military scene, and we insist on including it in the negotiations. It proved to be a big point. Why? Because Israel was planning to potentially agree on a ceasefire while remaining in Gaza, and then telling Hamas, well, tough luck, you agreed on the ceasefire, and the ceasefire did not explicitly include a clause that we need to leave the Philadelphia corridor and the Netzarim line. So Hamas were aware, because they know they have experience with Israel and how many times they tried to twist towards and certain clauses in previous agreements and outright breaking them. And now they are demanding that they have to withdraw. So we don't have a prospect of withdrawal now or a prospect of a ceasefire unless one side or the other gives up certain demands. Meaning Hamas would have to agree that, okay, fine, Israel can remain for at least for a certain period of time in the Philadelphia corridor. Why? Because Israel is saying that we dismantled or destroyed 80% of the tunnels from Rafah leading to Egypt. Theoretically, that means they have 20% left. That's if we want to believe them, okay? But according to their information, they are saying we destroyed 80% of them. Okay, meaning we have 20% left. So does that mean that if you destroy the further 20%, you would agree to withdraw? In our calculations, it would require them a month, according to their version, to destroy the further 20. And of course, we have lots of question marks of destroying anything. But according to their analysis and their reports, you destroyed 80%. It took you how many months since the Philadelphia corridor occupation? 3-4 months? Okay, you have 20% left. Take another month and then we'll reach a permanent ceasefire, theoretically speaking. Would they do that in a month's time? No, they wouldn't. Why? Because they are saying we need to have presence there. They're not having the excuse of we want to destroy the remaining tunnels. They want permanent presence there. Why? Because to them, it's their lack of presence, not to them, all of them, to be fair. That's Benjamin Netanyahu's argument. It's their lack of presence in the Philadelphia corridor is what led to the 7th of October. This is how Israel views it. If we were there, if we were monitoring, if we took down these tunnels, we wouldn't have had a 7th of October because Hamas's lifeline is coming primarily from Egypt, from the tunnels. So we need to remain there. Of course, that's a red line for the Palestinian side, and of course, that's a red line for the Egyptian side. It's a red line unless, again, Hamas decides to give up on the Philadelphia corridor for the sake of a ceasefire. Unlikely, based on the pattern that they've shown so far. They have stuck to their demands, and they did not give up any of their demands. They showed leniency, they showed openness, they were flexible, but they did not give up the thick lines of withdrawing, ending the war, allowing people to go back everywhere, allowing all aid in, and rebuilding Gaza, of course, alongside having a prisoner exchange. But it's not just the Palestinian side, it's Egypt. Egypt has a very big problem with the Israeli presence in the Netzarim line, and that's why they are showing more support for the Palestinian negotiating side when it comes to the Philadelphia corridor, because to Egypt, any Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor means having a weaker position when it comes to Egypt. Egypt does not want Israel to be there. Of course, you can argue a lot and criticize and say, well, you threatened Egypt before, why are you not doing anything? That's a different story. But in terms of their approach of them being there or on a permanent basis, because in theory, if they didn't have a problem with the Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor, why would they show this position in the negotiations? Like we had that outright, that they had this issue with Israel when it comes to the Philadelphia corridor, and they are insisting that they need to leave the Philadelphia corridor. Let me read a couple of details from this article that I wanted to share with you, and then I'll open the space up for all of you, and of course address some of your comments and questions. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in again. We had reports in several Israeli newspapers. One of them was the Jerusalem Post. One of them was the Jerusalem Post. They said, PM has authority to execute the hostages, Gallant is saying, and he clashes with Bibi in a cabinet meeting. Gallant said, Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has authority to execute the hostages. He is outright blaming Benjamin Netanyahu for executing the Israeli hostages, what they call as hostages, in Gaza. The discussion in the Security Cabinet on Thursday evening regarding the hostage deal escalated into a shouting match between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yaakov Galant, according to two senior officials familiar with the contents of the discussion. At the beginning of the meeting, the Defense Minister presented a lengthy review to the ministers, arguing that the hostage deal is a strategic crossroads for Israel. He emphasized that Israel does not proceed with the deal. If they do not proceed with the deal, the implications are much broader than just the issue of the hostages, stating that such inaction could lead to a regional war. Two senior Israeli officials said that towards the end of the discussion, after midnight, Netanyahu surprised the ministers with an unplanned announcement that he wanted to bring a vote, the continued presence of the IDF forces in the Philadelphia corridor. This is something that Netanyahu, he is used to doing these tricks, doing certain things without telling people in advance. He wants to have this vote immediately. He probably told the people involved, like his close crew, listen, I'm going to bring it up, don't tell anyone. All of a sudden he'll have it, again, to show authority. That doesn't mean that everyone supports him, but he creates the idea, the illusion that, look, everyone is supporting me, although the people that they didn't include core people from the negotiating delegation, for example. So he is using the fact that in his cabinet he has the people who are aligned to him, and he is submitting a vote in front of them. Why don't you have a vote with, firstly, why don't you have a referendum? It's such a crucial issue, Netanyahu. Why don't you have a referendum? Hello, Israeli public, we're at crossroads. I need to consult you. Do you want us to have a ceasefire and a prisoner exchange with Hamas, and with Hamas potentially staying there and outlining all of the risks, or not? And let the Israeli public decide. Or why don't you bring a vote to the negotiating delegation? He wouldn't do that. Why? Because he knows it's a losing vote. He will call for a vote secretly on the sly when he knows he's in a strong position. But he would never do that when he is in the weak position. Why? Because if he would have a vote, for example, with the negotiating delegation, all of them would vote against him. All of the negotiating delegation said previously, we want to reach a ceasefire. We don't have time. As a matter of fact, it wasn't only Gallant, but the head of the Mossad said, we don't have weeks. You know, the prisoners, our prisoners, or our hostages, they call them in Gaza, they don't have weeks. But he brought this cabinet because he has the upper hand. Netanyahu's remarks caused an uproar in the cabinet. Defense Minister Gallant opposed the move, telling Netanyahu and the other ministers that when the cabinet makes an official decision like this, it ties Israel's hands in negotiations on the hostage deal. A senior Israeli official said that Netanyahu announced his intention to bring the issue to a vote. Gallant responded saying the prime minister has the authority to bring any decision to a vote, even to execute the hostages. This is an unprecedented statement coming from anyone in the top establishment in Israel. blaming Netanyahu for this. We've had this for a very long time from the Israelis. Of course, the Israelis say that. Many Israelis say that, including the ones who are concerned with bringing change and ending this and having the ceasefire agreement, but not at a government level. Gallant stated that making an official decision to stay in the Philadelphia corridor as part of the hostage deal would effectively hand over control of Israel's strategic direction to Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Gallant argued that if Sinwar does not concede on the issue of the Philadelphia corridor, it means that Israel has effectively given up on one of its war objectives, the return of the hostages. This is the reasoning of Gallant. Netanyahu has another reasoning or interpretation for this. I will elaborate on that if they don't have it here. The choice is between remaining in the Philadelphia corridor and returning the hostages. You can't have both, Gallant said during the meeting. In the end, we'll find that either the hostages will die or will be forced to backtrack on this decision. Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi and Mossad Director David Barna expressed reservations before the vote. According to two cabinet sources, Halevi said during the meeting that such an official decision would be an unnecessary constraint that would further complicate an already complex situation concerning the hostages. Barnea also expressed reservations about the vote, stating that it was unnecessary at this point since the focus of the negotiations at this stage is not on the Philadelphia corridor, but on the lists of hostages and Palestinian prisoners to be released in the deal. Quote, Bibi set a trap for Gallant in the cabinet regarding the Philadelphia corridor. The decision was very unpleasant and became heated. The discussion, said a source familiar with the details in the meeting. The Prime Minister's office claimed that the Chief of Staff and the Mossad Director did not express reservations about the vote. The IDF spokesperson said they would not comment on statements made in closed, classified meetings. Benjamin Netanyahu's reasoning, before I get to the points that were raised at the end, and Gallant saying, or Barnea saying that the focus now is on the types of hostages or the level of people being released, because we heard Hamas talking about level of prisoners, who's going to be released and who's not going to be released. Firstly, Netanyahu's vision is not like Yaakov Galant. Yaakov Galant is viewing this as a point for Yahya Sinwar. If we say we want to stay there, we're weakening Israel. Netanyahu is saying that, no, we need to do that. Why do we need to do that? Because we need to apply pressure on Hamas. They need to feel the pressure so that they can give certain concessions, they can give certain things up in the negotiations. Netanyahu still believes that he can apply military pressure on Hamas and get political results in the process. And to him, giving this statement of, no, everyone voted, we need to remain in the Philadelphia corridor, means that he will apply more pressure, and at the end of the day, Hamas will have to give in. Hamas will have to give up and see that Israel is not backing away. And he, in effect, he thinks, Benjamin Netanyahu, that by doing that, he is flipping the table on Hamas. Hamas are relying on Israel's short breath, right? When it comes to the length of the war, Israel cannot tolerate a long war of attrition. Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to prove the opposite for Hamas. The problem is this game is very expensive. First, of course, the Palestinian people, primarily, they need a ceasefire, but also the Israelis who are kidnapped in Gaza, they're being killed. And if we take the percentage of people who were killed from the Gazan population and compare it to the percentage of Israelis who were in Gaza who were killed, the percentage is extremely higher when it comes to the Israelis. Why? Because so far Israel killed 30%, approximately 30% of their prisoners in Gaza. Compare that to the at least 40,000 confirmed. We know the number might be higher, but let's say the official death toll, 40,000, right? When it comes to the Palestinians in Gaza, you're talking about 2.5%. A large number. They're talking about devastating numbers, and every life is important, but you need to understand the cost that Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to pay. Is that cost? That's the question. Is that cost for the sake of Israel? Is that cost for the sake of Israel's military power or show? Is that for Israel politically? Is that for the Israeli society? Is that to reassure the Israeli public? Is that to have a good example of Israel across the world? No, and no. It's for the sake of him. It's for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu himself and him remaining in his position. And the talks, before I open the space for all of you, of the head of the Mossad, Dudi Barnea, about the fact that we're not talking about, we're not talking about the Philadelphia corridor now, we're talking about the prisoners, who's going to be released, because Hamas, clearly they're asking for heavyweight prisoners, the likes of Marwan Barghouthi, Ahmad Saadat, and Abdullah Barghouthi, and other senior figures potentially. But that Israel said they are a red line, we're not going to release them, they'll probably execute them in the prison. This shows that we had some sort of an understanding on the Philadelphia corridor, even if it means a withdrawal of 6 weeks. So Netanyahu clearly had at least either agreed or showed or hinted that he agrees on either a deal, either a full deal or this temporary withdrawal, to later sell it in a different manner to the Israeli public. But now he's bringing the Philadelphia corridor again on the table to hinder. This is what he usually does. He hinders the prospect of reaching a ceasefire at the cost of the lives, first and foremost, of the people of Gaza, and secondly, the lives of the Israelis who are imprisoned in Gaza. And again, this behavior, the primary interpretation that I have for it, of course, alongside Benjamin Netanyahu's personality, is the fact that I don't believe that Benjamin Netanyahu secured the day after when it comes to his position when this war ends. He knows that when all of this ends, more and more people in Israel are going to call for elections, more and more people are going to ask for investigations, things are going to be opened up against him when it comes to fraud charges and corruption charges. Many people alongside him will try and hide many things, especially when it comes to the 7th of October. If you open all of the investigations for the 7th of October, that's it. It's a death sentence for Israel. Why? Because the people will find out that it's Israel who carried out the massacres on the 7th of October in the Nova Festival and Raim and Nir Oz and Be'eri. It's the Israeli IDF pilots who were shooting at everything going back to Gaza, including the Israelis themselves, as confirmed by so many Israelis and the Israelis who were present in these settlements who came up with statements. That's why Israel started to have more censorship. It would open lots of cans of worms, and it would also show that Israel knew that there's an attack that's going to be happening imminently. And people would start to also say about the contracts that were handed out on the 2 weeks after the 7th of October, gas exploration contracts. Netanyahu handed out gas exploration contracts for the gas off the shores of Gaza 2 weeks after, and things like some of the largest banks in Israel selling stocks, right? Shorting bets, right? On certain things that didn't come in their time, right? From a financial perspective. And they made hundreds of millions in gains. And this is what I wanted to share with you in this live stream. Let me open the space up for all of you. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for another live stream. And welcome. Let me see where they are. And if you mind, if you have any comments for me, just highlighting them. Sailor Jerry Swallow, thank you so much. Thank you. I get your frustration. Thank you so much for that. And Zach, what are your thoughts on Israel shooting up and killing 5 UN aid workers that worked for the US? It's barely making any news. Yeah, why should it make the news? I mean, think about it from the Western mainstream media perspective. Why should that be news? They're trying to give Israel a good image, right? And cover up all of their crimes. Why should they highlight things that they do with their own people? Why should they tell you, well, Israel, they don't just only kill Palestinians, they also kill us. They also kill our residents. They also kill anyone from us who tries to help. They don't want to do that. And they've been killing people from the UN for a very long time now. It's not something new. How many UN schools or bases did they attack in Gaza and in Lebanon? In previous wars with Lebanon, by the way, massacres against UN staff. These people, they despise international organizations and international law. You're not talking about a state that has any sort of regard for this. And they do that because they are enabled, of course. They don't have any implications. They continue, right? And they're supported, you know, says they feel like they're untouchable. Shululu, thank you so much for your super. Much love back to you and everyone in Sweden. Thank you so much for that. Zelda, is it true the settlers have already moved to the north of Gaza? No, that's not true. That is not true, no. Some people try to have certain outposts outside the borders, outside the wall, because don't forget, like, this is one interesting thing. 3 years ago, Israel built a wall around Gaza, and it was supposed to be the most sophisticated wall. They spent over 1.2 billion on it. Tremendous amounts of concrete and steel. 10 meters over the ground, 10 or 20 meters under the ground. Sensors, updated technology, cameras, every detection, everything you can think of. It's as if, you know, it's in a wall that cannot be penetrated. They built this wall 2 years before the 7th of October. How can you justify that? How can you justify building a wall with such vast amounts of money and Hamas being able to conduct such a large-scale operation on the 7th of October? Just wanted to note that with regards to the wall. But when it comes to the people, they started having these outposts outside of the wall in Gaza. The army allowed some of them to stay there, and they're calling for a resettlement in Gaza. Don't forget that these people, they have plans. It's not like just they have plans. There are organizations in Israel, like they have organizations to build the third temple, and they already have everything, the engineering, the maps, the development plans, everything is ready. Likewise in Gaza. They give people digital tours on how their houses would look like in Gaza. They have plans for all of that. So to them, you know, the Palestinian people not giving up is just hindering them having a sea view. And they don't care how many bodies they would have under the house or whose bodies and how old they were. They wouldn't care about that. So there are people with that idea who still believe and still call for... but none of them, of course, established anything in the north. And as a matter of fact, the Israeli army, some of their bulldozer work and digging in Gaza had that in mind. The fact that they would have other plans afterwards, building plans. That's why they're not just detonating buildings for security purposes. The worst thing they could have done for their own security, by the way, is destroy whole buildings. Do you know that? They just destroy them to ethnically cleanse the population and, make life miserable for them, continue the genocide. But did they do their soldiers any favor? Of course they didn't. It's difficult to fight in destroyed situations. Urban warfare, even if you're used to urban warfare, you're used to moving between an intact building and another intact building, units, this, that, but destruction. Were the Israelis who are fighting in Gaza, were they trained? This is the question here. Were they trained on combat in destroyed infrastructure with tunnels all the time? No, that no one was trained on this type of environment. Yet they sent them to die, sacrifice. Because how can you send someone to war to go and fight without being trained? You're going and sacrificing your life. If you do any types of sports, you would have to have a training camp, right? An intense one, or making sure you know your opponent, you know everything, you know how to fight, so that you don't get slaughtered. But Benjamin Netanyahu, he threw the Israelis and sacrificed them in this war when they were unprepared. When they were not prepared, the Israeli troops were not prepared for this type of warfare. They were prepared for certain urban warfare, some of them, not all of them, because many of them are reservists. Don't forget, these reservists coming out from an office, working a 9-to-5 job, comfy job, and not even fit, nothing. But those who were trained, they were not trained on this type of environment. They are getting experience on the job now, on the genocide job. But before that, they didn't. And listen, many of them are realizing that. That's why now, today, Israel, there were 12 or 15 reservists from the IDF paratroopers. They were just released from Deir al-Balah. And 10, 11 months of fighting. The army called them again. Come, we need to be deployed again. They refused. They said, we're not going back. They refused. They're refusing to serve is becoming a norm now in Israel. And that shows you the level of devastation that Netanyahu has led the country to. You cannot stretch the limits of your army so much. You shouldn't let your army be stretched so much. Whatever the army is, genocidal army, moral, and Lord knows there aren't many moral armies in the world. But you can't do that for the sake of the establishment. If you stress your forces so much, you start building a sense of a revolution within. A sense of people standing up against you, a sense of rebellion. And Benjamin Netanyahu has no one to blame but himself for people refusing to serve and people fleeing and people not wanting to serve in the army, because they know what it is, what it's like in how they're sent in Gaza. Secondly, they know that they're fighting and dying for him, not for the sake of Israel. His son is in Miami. If you're so keen on Israel, bring your children. Show us a good example. Other peoples in the war cabinet showed example. Like Gadi Eisenkot, he lost his son and his nephew in a tunnel in Gaza. But Bibi's children, where are they? Where are they? Well, one of them is in Miami, sitting there, not doing anything. And Israelis, to them, like these people who are fighting, like, who am I going to die for? Israel? What? Okay, let's check if we have anything else before we... Okay. Cool. We don't have any more of your questions, so we'll wrap it up there. Oh, guys, thank you so much for tuning in for another live stream. Thank you so much for everyone who participates. Sorry if I missed some of your comments. We'll usually miss some of them in the live. I'll hopefully be with you tomorrow. I might have a video following this as well. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your evening or night or day, depending on where you are. Stay blessed. And I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone.